My name is Caitlin Mullen, and I'm a current sophomore here at Gettysburg, and my major is business organizations and management, and I have a minor in Spanish, and I'm also part of the golf team here. My artifact is called the Housewife. It is essentially like a Civil War era sewing kit. So it contained things like needles and extra pieces of cloth, buttons that matched the soldiers' uniforms and different threads in all different colors. And it essentially allowed the soldiers to repair their uniforms as they were on the move. These housewives were typically small in size, as they were being used to transport back and forth and carried by the soldiers, so they needed to be tiny. And they also had extra pockets for storing other items and holding valuables. For example, the one we have here at Gettysburg was found with 3 different images inside of it. So the soldier who owns this specific housewife used it as a safe space to hold items. I would say sentimental, because this object was able to connect the soldiers back to the home front, because when the soldiers see the sewing kit, it reminded them of their wives, their sisters, their mothers, and everybody they know who sewed for them back at home and helped to create their uniform. So it kind of reminded them of all the women figures in their life back at home. And also when they look at the object, it's a reminder of the little housewife, because it filled in for the housewife. So it reminded them of who was the housewife to them back at home. And also with this in particular housewife, I would use sentimental because it contained 3 different images. So the soldier had these as sentimental purpose to help remind him of why he was fighting, keep himself in the war, and what motivated him to be there. And it also was a way, if he knew he was going to die, he could hold these photos so he could have what soldiers called the good death. So they felt like they died with their family somewhat present, and they were dying fighting for what they believed in. And also if their family was to hear their last words and have their last moments recorded by other soldiers, the family would have known that their soldier had died holding a picture of them, and that they had a good death, and their family could go on grieving them and know that they didn't die in pain. I guess this kind of changed how I see gender norms during the time of the Civil War, because I feel when we learn about the Civil War, it's how men try and hold their power or help contain their masculinity, because they have to enroll in the war to be seen as masculine, because if they don't, they're not masculine. And then how all the women are seen as they need to be the perfect housewife. They need to sew, cook, clean, care for the kids. And then you see the soldiers come to war, and now they have to sew for themselves because they have to keep up with military standards. So in order to do that, they have to sew their clothes back together because their wives aren't there to do it for them. So now they have complete control over their clothing. And then they also have to sew their clothes in order to prevent themselves from getting infections or diseases due to the winds, the cold, or the snow, or the rain. And this helps to keep their masculinity, because if they were to get these illnesses or diseases, they would be seen as less masculine, because they'd have to leave the war, or they might even pass away due to these illnesses. So being able to sew their own clothes and continue fighting makes them seem more masculine. So I guess now the once gender norm of oh, men can't sew because that's the housewife's job, is now something is seen as highly masculine, because if he knows how to do this, he can stay in the war, and he's seen as more powerful amongst his comrades. So Louis Tway had this object when he was discharged from the army, and then I think it was just passed down through generation to generation, and then eventually someone handed it into special collections. I'm not sure who or when, but I know he was discharged with it, and then it ended up here years later. This artifact still kind of exists in modern day to some extent. It's no longer called the housewife, and that's due to the change in gender norms too. Anyone can use a sewing kit, so now everybody still has sewing kits, and today they're still the same small size in order to use them on the go, but they're just commonly used, not just by soldiers now. I guess since this artifact is more of a commonly held soldier item, you can probably find them in a lot of museums, since most soldiers had them in order to protect themselves from the cold. And So obviously here at Special Collections and I think in many museums they'll probably have one.